The wind screamed down the slopes of the Cascade Range, carrying with it sharp shards of snow that felt more like broken glass than frozen water. The storm had swallowed the forest whole, turning pine trees into blurry shadows and the ground into a white abyss where even footsteps seemed to vanish in seconds. It was the kind of night when people stayed indoors, locked their doors, and prayed the power lines would hold. But Ryan Hale was not most people. His breath formed clouds inside the hood of his parka as he leaned forward into the gale, each step crunching deep into the snowpack. His radio hissed static, too much interference from the storm to get a clear signal from base. He adjusted the strap of his pack and whistled sharply through his teeth. Zeus, the German shepherd at his side, lifted his head, ears twitching against the wind. The dog's coat was already caked with white, but his dark eyes gleamed with focus. His breath puffed in quick bursts as he pulled ahead, nose low, tail stiff with purpose. "Find him, boy," Ryan muttered, voice barely audible over the howl of the storm. "Find the kid." The call had come an hour earlier, though time blurred in weather like this. A 4-year-old boy named Eli Turner had wandered away from home. Nobody knew why. By the time his disappearance was noticed, the snow had started falling hard, and soon it turned into a full-scale blizzard. Ryan knew what that meant. At this temperature, a child could last maybe 2 hours. Maybe. He forced himself not to picture what usually happened when kids got lost in weather like this. Eyes forward, he told himself, though the words were more for his own nerves than for Zeus. The dog tugged at the long lead clipped to Ryan's belt, pausing to sniff a drift, then bounding ahead again. Ryan trusted Zeus's instincts more than he trusted the maps stuffed in his pack. Dogs didn't second-guess, they just followed the truth laid out in scent and silence. For a long stretch it felt hopeless. The snow blew sideways, erasing every trace of small footprints. Branches cracked overhead under the weight of ice, sometimes dropping with a sound like a gunshot. Each time, Ryan flinched and then pressed forward, boots sinking deeper into powder. He was about to stop and recalibrate when Zeus froze. The dog's muscles went taut, his ears pricked, and a low bark burst from his throat. He pulled hard left, toward a cluster of bent trees near a rock outcropping. Ryan's heart jumped. He unclipped the lead, letting Zeus sprint ahead. "Go," he shouted. Zeus bounded into the drifts, disappearing for a moment in the swirling white. Ryan followed, stumbling, his legs burning with effort. His flashlight beam cut across snow and branches until it landed on a shape beneath a half-fallen cedar. At first, Ryan thought it was just another mound of snow. Then the shape shifted, just barely. "Oh God," he breathed. It was a child. The boy was curled on his side, knees to chest, arms wrapped around something clutched tight to his chest. His small body was half buried in powder, his jacket stiff with ice. His face was pale, lips tinged blue, lashes heavy with frost, and in his mittened hands he held a small wooden truck, one wheel broken clean off. "Eli." Ryan knelt quickly, brushing snow away from the boy's face. He pressed 2 fingers against the child's neck. A faint flutter so weak it was almost lost to the storm, but it was there. Zeus went softly, circling them, pressing his body close as if to shield the boy from the wind. "You did it, buddy," Ryan said, his throat tight. "You found him." He worked fast, emergency blanket out of the pack. Wrapped tight, checked breathing, shallow, but steady enough. He couldn't wait for the medics. The storm was only getting worse, and there was no guarantee they'd even make it through the roadblocks tonight. Ryan pulled the boy into his arms, Eli's head lolled against his chest, eyes flickering open for the briefest second. The boy's lips moved, barely a whisper. Guardian Ryan froze. For a second he thought he'd misheard, but Eli's gaze wasn't on him, it was fixed on Zeus, who stood tall in the snow, ears pricked, tail waving slow and steady. Ryan swallowed hard. "Yeah, kid. He's your guardian tonight." Snow stuck his face as he rose, cradling the boy against him. He could feel the fragile weight, the brittle bones, the way the child's body shook with the faintest tremors of life clinging to warmth. "Hang on," Eli, Ryan whispered fiercely. "We've got you. You're not alone." Zeus barked once, sharp and urgent, then trotted ahead, nose to the wind. Ryan followed, boots hammering through the drifts, every step a battle against the storm. He knew the way back would be harder than the way in, but now he had something worth fighting the blizzard for. And as they pushed into the white abyss together, man, dog, and child, the forest seemed to close in behind them, erasing their path as if the mountain itself wanted to keep its secret. But Ryan wouldn't let go, not tonight. Before the storm swallowed him, Eli Turner lived in a house that never seemed to hold warmth, no matter how hard the heater tried. The town of Silverpine lay crouched against the icy rim of Crater Lake, A place that looked postcard perfect from the outside, dark forests hugging the water, mountains standing guard, but beauty in winter was cruel. The lake froze at the edges, the streets turned to glass, and the houses leaned into the wind as if bracing themselves against some unseen blow. Eli's house was one of those, a squat, two-bedroom rental with peeling paint and windows that rattled when the storms came in. It wasn't so much a home as it was a place to endure. Inside, the air always carried a chill, not just the kind that seeped through cracks in the walls, but the kind that came from silence, the sort of silence that pressed down heavy and left you searching for places to hide. Eli had learned to move quietly through that silence. He was small for his 4 years, with narrow shoulders and a thin frame that made him look like a bird you could almost see through. His dark eyes were wide, alert, and far older than they should have been. When he walked, he placed his feet carefully, toe to heel, as if even the creak of a floorboard might spark trouble. Most kids his age made noise just by existing, rattling toys, singing nonsense songs, stomping through hallways. Eli didn't. He carried himself as if the world were glass, and he was afraid to be the one who broke it. The one thing he allowed himself was the little truck he always carried, a wooden toy, rough around the edges, one wheel broken off so it never rolled quite right. His father had carved it for him before the night shifts took him away. To anyone else, it was junk, but to Eli it was proof, a reminder that, once upon a time, someone had thought of him long enough to shape a gift with their own hands. At night, when the house was colder than the air outside, he'd hold it against his chest and imagine it still carried the warmth of the moment it was made. But Eli's favorite ritual came in the mornings, when the breath of the lake and the bite of winter fogged the windows of his small bedroom. He'd climb onto the narrow bed, knees sinking into the thin mattress, and lean close to the glass. His breath clouded the pane, making a patch of soft white. With one finger, he would draw, always the same shape, a wolf. He gave it tall ears, a strong tail, and eyes that watched over everything. Sometimes he drew it running, sometimes standing guard. To him, the wolf wasn't scary, it was safety, a protector, something that could push back the dark and the silence. He called the wolf Guardian. "Guardian doesn't get cold," he whispered once, his finger tracing the curve of the wolf's back. "Guardian doesn't get scared." When he was finished, the image stayed on the glass until the frost reclaimed it, until the window cleared and erased the lines as if they had never been there. But the wolf always came back the next day, stronger, bigger, more real in Eli's imagination. Sometimes, when his stepmother's voice cut through the walls, sharp and tired, Eli would close his eyes and pretend Guardian was standing between them, ears forward, teeth bared, daring anyone to hurt him. It was easier than admitting what he already knew, that in this house, he had no real protector. The boy's father, Mac, worked nights at the mine. He came home in the mornings with the gray dust of ore still clinging to his hair, his eyes hollow with fatigue. He loved his son. Eli believed that much, but love that's locked behind exhaustion and silence doesn't always make it through. And Mark's absence made the walls colder. Clara, the woman who had married Mark after Eli's mother was gone, wasn't cruel in the way villains are cruel in stories. Her cruelty was small, mean, made up of sighs that lasted too long, of words that cut without shouting. To her, Eli wasn't a boy, he was a burden, a reminder of someone else's love that she could never replace. And so Eli grew quieter, sharper at the edges, like a child learning to tiptoe along ice. That was life in Silverpine, a boy, a wooden truck, and a wolf made of frost. If you had asked him why he clung to that wolf, he couldn't have explained it. Children rarely can. But he knew what it felt like to imagine something strong standing for him, something unbreakable in a world where everything else cracked and bent. He believed in Guardian the way other kids believed in superheroes, maybe more than that. Guardian was his secret, his breath on glass, his prayer whispered in the language of drawings. And sometimes, in the hush before sleep, Eli thought he could almost hear it, the low growl of a wolf outside, steady and sure, promising him that someday he wouldn't have to be afraid anymore. He pressed the wooden truck close, traced the lines of Guardian on the window, and waited for morning, because even in the coldest house by the lake, a boy can build warmth out of hope. The kitchen in the Turner house always smelled faintly of boiled cabbage. No matter what was on the stove, the walls, once painted a cheerful yellow, had dulled to a grayish hue under years of steam and cigarette smoke. The single light bulb above the table flickered sometimes, making the room feel more like a waiting room than a place where a family might gather. Eli sat at the far end of the wooden table, his small body perched on the edge of a chair too big for him. His legs didn't quite reach the floor, and his toes curled around the chair rung as if that might anchor him in place. His wooden truck rested in his lap, hidden beneath the table where only he could see it. He rubbed his thumb over the carved ridges, the familiar texture grounding him against the chill in the air. Clara Turner moved around the kitchen with the shop efficiency of someone who was always tired and always angry about being tired. She wasn't much older than Mark, 32, maybe 33, but her eyes looked older. The skin beneath them was shadowed, her jaw set in a permanent clench. Her steps across the linoleum were quick, precise. A pot banged onto the stove. A spoon clattered into the sink. The sounds weren't accidents. They were statements, punctuation marks in a language Eli had learned to read. To Clara, Eli was noise when she wanted quiet, mess when she wanted order, demand when she had nothing left to give. She never said those exact words, but she didn't need to. He felt it in the way she sighed when he entered a room, in the way her gaze flicked past him like he was another chore to check off the list. He's like a cold draft you can't get rid of, she had once muttered on the phone, thinking Eli couldn't hear, always there, always making the house uncomfortable. Eli had remembered that. He remembered everything. Mark, his father, wasn't there to soften the edges. The mind swallowed him most nights. He'd leave just before dinner, pulling on his heavy boots while Eli lingered by the door, hoping for a word, a glance, a touch on the shoulder. Sometimes Mark ruffled his hair. Sometimes he didn't, and when he did, it was quick, awkward, like a man trying to express love with hands that had forgotten how Mark did love him. Eli clung to that belief the way he clung to his wooden truck. But love wrapped in silence and distance doesn't warm a child the way it should, and so the kitchen grew colder. Clara ladled watery soup into bowls, her movements clipped. She set one in front of Eli without looking at him, the liquid sloshing dangerously near the rim. Her voice, when it came, was sharp enough to cut. Eat. Eli nodded quickly, though she hadn't asked for a response. He picked up the spoon with small, careful hands, dipping it into the thin broth. He tried not to make a sound as he lifted it to his mouth. The soup was bland, more water than anything else, but he swallowed dutifully. Silence pressed in, broken only by the occasional scrape of Clara's spoon against her bowl. It was the kind of silence that hummed, heavy and alive, like something waiting to break. Eli knew better than to be the one who broke it. Max Absinthe sat at the table too, heavier than any chair. The empty seat across from Clara was proof of that. Eli shifted slightly, his foot brushing the wooden leg of the chair beside him. The faint thud it made against the floor echoed louder than it should have. Clara's head snapped up, her eyes narrowed. "Can't you sit still for once?" she snapped, her spoon clattering against the bowl. Always fidgeting, always making noise. Eli's lips parted, then closed again. He wanted to say sorry. He wanted to explain that it was an accident, that he hadn't meant to, but he knew better. Words never made things better. Words only drew more fire. So he bowed his head lower and focused on the steam rising from the soup, counting the flecks of pepper floating on the surface. 1, 2, 3. Numbers were safe. Numbers didn't shout. Clara shook her head, muttering under her breath about bills, about the rent, about Mark's late paycheck. Her voice rose and fell like waves, crashing hardest whenever Eli's spoon plinked too loudly against his bowl. The kitchen grew colder still. Later, after she'd stormed into the living room with a cordless phone, her voice rang sharp through the walls. Mark's voice came faintly from the other end, calm, weary, distant. Clara's words cut through louder. Complaints about money, about the cold house, about Eli, always circling back to Eli. Eli stayed at the table long after the soup had cooled, long after his stomach ached from forcing it down. He held his truck under the table, pressing it against his chest, imagining the growl of a wolf outside the frosted window. Guardian would never let anyone talk to him that way. Guardian would stand tall, tea-spared, unafraid of voices or storms. But Guardian was only a shape on glass. In the Turner kitchen, silence and sharp words ruled, and Eli, small, careful Eli, did what he always did. He stayed quiet. He stayed invisible. The small kitchen of the Turner house smelled faintly of boiled cabbage and damp wood. The single overhead bulb flickered, humming with an electric fatigue, as if even the light had grown weary of surviving here. Outside, Crater Lake's winter pressed against the windows, a thick silence, layered with frost. Inside, the silence was sharper, colder than the snow. Eli sat at the edge of the warm pine table, his legs not quite reaching the floor. His thin hands clutched the hem of his sweater as Clara slid a pot onto the stove with a metallic thud. She didn't look at him. She rarely did. Her tired eyes carried the sharpness of someone who'd given up on tenderness years ago. The soup was thin, little more than water-tinted gray by a handful of vegetables boiled past recognition. Clara ladled it into bowls, chipped at the rim, the steam curling weakly before fading into the chill of the room. "Eat," she said flatly, setting the bowl in front of Eli. Her voice was not cruel, not even loud, just brittle, like ice underfoot. Eli picked up the old spoon beside his bowl. The metal tasted like iron when it touched his lips, a metallic taint that never seemed to wash away, no matter how many times it was scrubbed. He stirred the liquid slowly, watching the faint shimmer of oil ripple on the surface. He didn't look up. Across the table, Clara ate in silence, each clink of her spoon against porcelain a reminder of rules unspoken. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make a sound that draws attention. And above all, do not upset the fragile balance of this house. The only voice came from the telephone mounted on the wall. Mark's voice, muffled and distant, leaked through the receiver resting between Clara's shoulder and ear. He was calling from the mine, his words broken by static. "Won't be back till morning, another shift," he said. There was weariness in his tone, though Eli thought he detected something else, to an apology that never quite made it to words. Clara's reply was a series of clipped phrases, half meant for him, half for herself. "Yes, more hours, of course. Somebody has to. No, he's fine." She glanced at Eli without warmth, then looked away. Eli lowered his eyes back to the soup. To steady his hands, he began to count the black flecks floating in the broth, tiny bits of pepper. 1, 2, 3, 4. He counted slowly, quietly, as though numbers could shield him, could build invisible walls against the cold of her silence. For a while, the only sounds were the muted scrape of spoons and Clara's voice fading as she hung up the phone. Then came the accident. It was nothing, really. A slip of his spoon, a tiny clink too loud as it struck the side of his bowl. The noise broke the tension like glass shattering. Clara froze, her hand tightening on the edge of the table. Her eyes lifted to him, sharp and narrowed. The air in the room thickened. "Can't you sit still for 5 minutes?" she hissed. The words were a spark, but her hand was the flame. She slammed her own bowl down, the thin porcelain cracking, soup spilling across the table. The noise rang like a gunshot in the small kitchen. Eli flinched, shrinking back into his chair. His heart thudded in his chest, loud in his own ears. He didn't cry. He didn't answer. He knew better. "Every night it's something with you," Clara went on, her breath quick and harsh. She didn't shout, but her words carried the weight of a storm. "You are like a draft through this house, cold, constant, never-ending. Do you understand what that does to people?" Eli curled his shoulders in, as if making himself smaller would somehow soften the blows of her voice. His eyes stayed fixed on the table, on the spill spreading like a dark stain across the wood. Silence reclaimed the room. Clara stood, muttering under her breath, and took the broken bowl to the sink. The sound of running water filled the void, but it wasn't comforting. It was mechanical, endless. Eli remained frozen, his spoon still hovering above the soup, his stomach twisted, but not from hunger. He wanted to disappear into the chair, into the wood, into the floor itself. He had learned the safest way to survive moments like this. Make no sound, make no defense. The less he gave her to notice, the sooner the storm passed. When Clara finally turned off the water, she didn't look at him again. She wiped her hands on a rag and left the kitchen, her footsteps fading into the back hallway. The house grew still. Only then did Eli allow himself to breathe deeply, his small chest rising and falling as though he'd just outrun something far larger than himself. He looked at the soup, now lukewarm, and set the spoon down carefully. His fingers brushed against the wooden truck resting on the chair beside him, the one carved by his father. The edges were smooth from his touch, worn into a comfort his heart clung to. He whispered to it, so softly the words barely left his lips. "Guardian." The name hung in the air like a secret, on the frosted window above the sink. His breath fogged the glass, and with one trembling finger, Eli traced the shape of a wolf, the same one he had drawn before. The wolf's silhouette stood tall, proud, everything he longed to be but couldn't. It was his answer to the silence, his shield against the storm. And in that quiet kitchen, while the wind howled outside and the house groaned against the cold, Eli Turner learned once again the lesson he knew by heart. Survival wasn't about fighting back. It was about holding still, making no sound, and waiting for the world to forget you were there. Upstairs, the Turner house grew colder with every step. The narrow staircase creaked beneath Eli's small feet as he climbed, this sound sharp in the stillness of the night. Clara's door had already shut behind her, and from down the hall came only silence. No television, no music, no laughter, just silence, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Eli pushed open his bedroom door, The room was little more than a box at the end of the hall, with paint peeling and faint strips near the ceiling and a window whose frame whistled when the wind found its cracks. The single bulb overhead hummed, casting a pale light that left the corners shadowed. He closed the door softly, careful not to let the latch click too loudly, then crossed to his bed. The mattress sagged in the middle, the blanket thin. But this space, small as it was the only place he could call his own. Clutched tight in his hands was the wooden truck. The back wheel had long since broken, and when he set it on the floor, it rattled and clicked as it rolled unevenly across the boards. That sound, clack, 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 was familiar, almost like a heartbeat he could hold in his hands. He knelt on the floor and pushed the truck gently forward. It wobbled, the broken wheel stuttering, then tipped onto its side. Eli picked it up, straightened it, and tried again. Each time it faltered, each time it fell. He lifted it back onto its path. "It still works," he whispered. He whispered as though reassuring the toy. His voice was so soft it barely carried beyond his lips. On the small dresser by the wall sat a picture frame. The glass was cracked at the corner, and the photograph inside had begun to fade, but Eli knew every detail by heart. In it, he was younger, barely two, perched on his father's lap. Mark's arm was around him. A rare smile caught on his face. Behind them, sunlight spilled across a summer porch, but the frame had been turned down, laid flat against the dresser. Clara always made sure of that. Eli patted across the room, lifted the frame gently, and propped it upright again. His finger traced the outline of his father's smile, then the smaller version of himself cradled in those arms. "I remember," he murmured, though the truth was blurry. Memories came in fragments, voices, warmth, the scent of cedar shavings from his father's workbench. The picture filled in the rest. He carried the frame back to the bed and sat with it on his knees, the wooden truck resting beside him. The broken wheel clicked softly against the sheets whenever he shifted. Outside, wind pressed against the house, rattling the window pane. The cold seeped in, brushing against his skin like invisible fingers. Eli pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders and pressed the photograph close to his chest. For a long time, he just sat there, rocking slightly, listening to the quiet. The silence was different here, less sharp, less dangerous than in the kitchen. It was heavy, but it allowed him to speak in whispers no one else would hear. His lips trembled as he leaned close to the frame, resting his forehead against the cool glass. His words came out like a secret prayer. "I don't need much," he said. "I just want to be loved." The phrase was so small, so fragile, that it dissolved into the air as soon as it was spoken. Yet saying it aloud filled him with a strange courage, as though the walls themselves might carry it away to someone who could hear. Eli set the frame carefully back on the dresser, this time leaving it standing, and crawled under the blanket. He drew the wooden truck close, holding it against his chest the way other children clutched stuffed animals. The uneven wheel pressed against his arm, clicking faintly whenever he shifted. But he welcomed the sound. "Guardian," he whispered again, naming the wolf he had drawn on the glass earlier that day. In his mind, he pictured the animal standing tall outside his window, strong enough to block the cold, fierce enough to keep Clara's storms at bay. The truck, the photograph, the wolf in his imagination, they were his trinity of comfort, fragile yet enduring. They reminded him that even if love felt far away, it had once existed, and maybe, just maybe, it could return. He closed his eyes. The house creaked and groaned against the wind, but within his small bedroom, Eli Turner drifted toward sleep with a picture of his father's smile and the sound of the broken wheel echoing softly into the night. The echo of Clara's shouting still clung to the walls long after her voice had gone silent. In his room, Eli sat curled on the edge of his bed, the wooden truck pressed so tightly to his chest it dug into his ribs. His ears still rang with the sound of the bowl shattering against the counter, the clipped fury in Clara's words. It was as though the house itself had absorbed her anger, the air heavy with it, leaving no corner for him to breathe freely. He tried to steady his breathing. In, out, count the seconds. 1, 2, 3. But the rhythm faltered as his chest tightened, as if ropes were binding him from the inside. His heart thudded faster and faster, until it felt like it might burst. Eli glanced toward the window. Beyond the frosted glass, the storm howled, a white curtain of snow swirling beneath the porch light. He imagined the world out there, vast, cold, dangerous, and yet somehow gentler than the walls closing in around him now. His gaze dropped to the broken wheel of his truck. He rolled it between his palms, listening to the faint click it made. That sound had always comforted him. Tonight, it whispered something new. Move. Go. Don't stay. The thought rose slowly, like water seeping under a door, until it filled every corner of his mind. If I leave, maybe it'll be better. Maybe outside is bigger than this house. Maybe someone out there will see me. He whispered it aloud, testing the shape of the words. Maybe outside is bigger than this house. Once spoken, the idea grew roots. His small hands tightened around the toy, his knuckles pale. He knew he couldn't stay, not tonight. Eli slipped off the bed, careful not to let the frame creak. His bare feet touched the cold floorboards, and he winced at the sting. He crossed the room quietly, every step rehearsed and silenced. At the dresser, he lifted the photograph of him and his father once more. He stared at it for a long time, as though waiting for Mark's smile to offer an answer. But the man in the photo said nothing. He wanted to take it with him, but the frame was heavy. The glass cracked. Clara would notice. Instead, he whispered to the image, "I'll find you, Daddy. I promise." Then he set it gently back and turned toward the door. The hallway was dark. Clara's room was closed, but faint light leaked through the crack at the bottom. Her lamp, maybe, or the glow of a cigarette she smoked when she thought no one saw. Eli held his breath as he padded past. The wooden truck pressed under his arm. Down the stairs every creak felt like thunder. He paused often, listening for her footsteps, for the scrape of a door opening. Nothing. Only the moan of the storm outside. At the front door, his small fingers fumbled with the lock. It stuck, stiff with age, but finally turned with a soft metallic groan. The sound made him flinch, but Clara didn't stir. He pulled the door open just wide enough to slip through, the blast of icy air nearly knocking him back. The cold bit instantly at his skin, sharp as needles. His breath burst out in clouds. Snow swirled under the porch light, carried on winds that wailed like distant voices. For a heartbeat, fear rooted him there, his small frame silhouetted in the doorway, caught between two worlds. Then he stepped forward. The snow swallowed him at once. It rose high against his boots, clinging to his pants, numbing his ankles. Each step was heavy, but he pressed on, clutching the truck so tightly his fingers ached. The world was nothing but white and wind, but to Eli it was freedom. Behind him, the house loomed a dark, silent shape against the storm. He didn't look back, not once. Eli trudged into the night, guided only by the pounding of his heart and the fragile hope that somewhere beyond the blizzard lay something warmer, larger, safer than the cold walls he had left behind. And as the snow closed around him, he whispered into the storm, voice trembling but determined, "Guardian, walk with me." The call came just after midnight. Ryan Hale's phone buzzed against the worn wood of his nightstand, dragging him from a restless sleep. On the other end, a dispatcher's voice crackled through static. "Missing child, 4 years old, last seen near Silverpine, blizzard conditions. Volunteers needed." Ryan was already sitting upright before the words had finished. He pulled on his boots in the dark, his chest tightening with a familiar mix of urgency and dread. A child, this storm. Time wasn't on their side. Zeus stirred from his blanket at the foot of the bed. The German shepherd's ears stood tall, his intelligent eyes locked on Ryan, sensing the tension in his every move. By the time Ryan zipped his parka, Zeus was already at the door, tail rigged, body quivering with anticipation. The drive to the volunteer station was slow and treacherous, snow battering the windshield in furious sheets. The wipers couldn't keep up. The road to Silverpine was lined with black pines bending under the weight of fresh powder. Ryan gripped the wheel, headlights carving only a few feet ahead, inside the small firehouse that served as a rescue hub. The air was thick with urgency. Men and women in layers of gear huddled around a long folding table scattered with maps. The wind whistled through cracks in the walls, rattling the windows as if even the building feared what lay outside. The coordinator, Sheriff Donovan, stood at the head of the table, voice low but sharp. "Boy's name is Eli Turner, 4 years old. Last seen at home near Crater Lake sometime before 10 p.m. By the time Clara noticed he was gone, the storm had already rolled in. A murmur passed through the room. Heads shook. Some swore softly under their breath. 4 years old, one volunteer muttered, tugging his knit cap lower. In this storm, God help him. Ryan bent over the map, tracing the blue ink line that marked the Turner property. The house sat close to the edge of the forest, where logging roads disappeared into miles of unbroken wilderness. He knew the terrain well, knew how unforgiving it became under heavy snow. Donovan went on. "Search grid will run north and west. Teams of 2, mark and sweep. Conditions are deteriorating fast, so stay within radio range." His eyes lifted to Ryan and Zeus. "We'll need your pair on scent tracking. If anyone can cut through this storm, it's that dog." Ryan nodded once, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. He crouched beside Zeus, clipping the reflective vest over the dog's lean body. "You hear that, buddy? "We're up." Zeus's tail flicked once, eyes never leaving Ryan's face. When the doors to the firehouse swung open, the storm punched inside with a roar. Snowflakes swirled like shards of glass under the floodlights. Ryan pulled up his hood, secured his headlamp, and stepped out into the chaos with Zeus bounding at his side. The search began in silence, save for the crunch of boots and the distant crackle of radios. Pairs of volunteers spread across the whitened fields, their headlamps glowing like fireflies swallowed quickly by the storm. Ryan kept his gloved hand firm on Zeus's harness as they moved toward the dog's nose was already low to the ground, sniffing, weaving, tail stiff. For long minutes, there was nothing, only the slap of wind and the sting of ice on Ryan's face. He wondered if the scent had already been buried under the endless snow. Then Zeus froze, his ears twitched, nostrils flaring, and with a sudden pull he veered left, deeper into the trees. Ryan followed, stumbling through drifts that swallowed his boots to the calf. His breath came in clouds that instantly froze at the edges of his mask. "Got something," Ryan panted, though he already knew the answer. Zeus's body had transformed, all taut lines and certainty. The dog was locked on. Ryan keyed his radio. "This is Hale. Zeus has a trace. We're moving northeast into the timberline." Static, then Donovan's reply. "Copy that. Stay in contact." Godspeed. The forest closed around them, branches heavy with snow bending low. The storm muffled to a howling whisper under the canopy. Ryan's headlamp beam cut through the white haze, bouncing off trunks and frozen brush. Every so often, Zeus paused, circling, then pressed forward again. The farther they went, the stronger Ryan's unease grew. A child this small, this far out, how could he possibly survive? But Ryan shoved the thought down. Doubt had no place here. The boy was out there, and it was his job to bring him back. Zeus stopped suddenly, pawing at the ground near a half-buried depression. Ryan crouched, scraping at the snow with his gloves. Faint, nearly erased, was the outline of something small, a footprint. His heart kicked hard. 4 years old, yes, it matched. "You're a miracle worker," Ryan whispered, ripping Zeus's neck in gratitude. The dog pressed forward again, tugging Ryan deeper into the white abyss. The storm raged around them, merciless and unrelenting. But somewhere ahead was a boy clutching a broken wooden truck, and as long as Zeus kept pulling, Ryan would follow into the trees, into the storm, into whatever it took to bring Eli Turner home. The forest groaned beneath the storm's weight, branches cracking in the darkness as if the trees themselves were surrendering to winter's fury. Ryan Hale pressed onward, each step sinking into snow that clutched at his legs like quicksand. The cold cut deep, gnawing through layers of wool and nylon until it touched bone. Ahead, Zeus moved with relentless focus, nose to the ground, weaving in jagged patterns. His breath came in quick bursts of steam, ears pinned back against the shrieking wind. Ryan tightened his grip on the harness, trusting the dog's instinct more than his own failing sight. Then, just as quickly as the trail had appeared, it seemed to vanish. Ryan dropped to his knees, brushing snow aside with gloved hands. The faint imprint of a small boot was there, then gone. Erased by the storm, he leaned lower, heart pounding, searching desperately for anything that might prove the boy had been real and not just a ghost conjured by their need to find him. But the snow was winning, filling every gap, smothering every sign. "Damn it," Ryan muttered, his voice lost to the wind. Zeus wind, circling. Trying to catch the scent again, he paused, sniffed hard, then darted forward a few feet, only to stop once more, confused. The trail was breaking apart, unraveling under the storm's fury. Ryan closed his eyes for a moment, blocking out the howl of the blizzard, and in that darkness, a memory rose, unbidden, sharp, merciless, and heavy as the cold pressing on his chest. He was 14 again, standing on the edge of a river swollen by spring melt. His little sister Leah had slipped while chasing her kite. One moment she was laughing, the next she was gone, swallowed by the current. Ryan had run along the bank, screaming her name, throwing sticks, shouting that he was coming, but his legs had been too slow, his arms too weak, the water too fast. They found her body miles downstream. He had never forgiven himself. That night carved a scar so deep it never healed, and years later, it had driven him here into rescue work, into storms like this one. If he couldn't save Leah, maybe he could save someone else. Maybe he could make the world balance out, even a little. Now kneeling in the snow, staring at the fading print of a child's boot, Ryan felt the same terror clatter at his chest. Not again, not this time. He forced himself up, gripping the radio with numb fingers. "This is Hale. We've got faint tracks heading northeast, but they're fading fast. I'm going to push deeper." "Over static," answered. Then Donegan's voice cut through. Copy that, Hale. Be careful. If it's too far. Ryan clicked the radio off before the rest of the warning could reach him. Too far wasn't an option, Zeus, he said, crouching to meet the dog's eyes. Snow clung to the German shepherd's thick whiskers, his powerful frame trembling from exhaustion but never from doubt. We're not losing him. Not tonight. You hear me? Zeus barked once, sharp and sure, then plunged forward again. Ryan followed, lungs burning, boots dragging. Together they climbed over fallen logs and pushed through drifts that swallowed their knees. The forest seemed endless, an unbroken maze of shadows and white. The storm battered them from all sides, shrieking in their ears, clawing at their eyes. Ryan's headlamp beam caught only fragments of trunk here, a branch there before the wind swallowed them whole. Every so often, another footprint surfaced, small, delicate, quickly vanishing beneath the storm's hand. Each one was a lifeline, proof that Eli Turner had been there, that he was still out there, still fighting. Ryan pressed forward, his breath ragged, the cold bit into his teeth, his eyelashes crusted with ice, but he refused to slow. Each step was a defiance, a vow. Hold on, kid, he whispered into the night. Just hold on a little longer. At one point, the tracks disappeared entirely, swept clean as though the storm had swallowed the boy whole. Ryan felt panic flare, a hollow ache in his chest that threatened to consume him. But Zeus didn't falter. The dog moved in tight circles, sniffing, then suddenly lunged toward a cluster of bent pines. Ryan stumbled after him, heart hammering, by scanning every shadow. Nothing yet, no color against the white, no small figure curled in the snow, only emptiness. The blizzard roared louder, pressing its weight down on man and dog alike. But Ryan didn't stop. He couldn't, because somewhere ahead was a boy who had walked out into the storm, clutching a broken wooden truck, believing that the world outside his home might be kinder. Ryan couldn't let that hope end in silence under the snow. So, he pressed on, step by punishing step, alongside the only partner he trusted with his life. Together, Ryan Hale and Zeus waged war against the storm, refusing to let the night claim another child. Zeus froze. One moment he was charging ahead through the storm. The next he stopped so abruptly that Ryan nearly stumbled into him. The German shepherd's thick hackles rose, his powerful body going rigid, ears pricked forward. Then he barked, deep, sharp, urgent. Ryan's pulse spiked. He swept his headlamp across the trees, the beam trembling with the storm's push. At first there was nothing but white fury, snow slashing sideways, shadows twisting. Then, at the edge of the light, he saw it, a broken pine, split down the middle, one half leaning like a crooked arm against the other. Beneath its sagging branches, something small was curled tight against the trunk. Ryan's breath caught. He staggered forward, crashing through drifts, dropping to his knees beside the figure. It was a boy, tiny, bundled in a jacket far too thin for the storm. His arms were wrapped protectively around a wooden toy truck, pressed tight to his chest as if it could shield him from the cold. Snow had dusted his lashes, his lips were pale, and his skin carried that awful bluish tint Ryan knew too well. Eli. Ryan's voice cracked. He reached out with shaking hands, brushing snow from the boy's face. The child stirred faintly, eyelids fluttering. His voice came as the softest whisper, broken by chattering teeth. Guardian. Ryan froze. For an instant, the storm around him seemed to fade. The boy wasn't looking at him, his gaze was unfocused, lost somewhere between dream and survival. But there was awe in his tone, like he was calling out to something he believed would save him. Ryan glanced at Zeus. The dog stood watch over them, chest heaving, eyes burning with fierce loyalty. And suddenly Ryan understood. To Eli, in his haze of fear and cold, Zeus must have looked like a guardian wolf, a protector conjured from the wilderness itself. Ryan swallowed hard, forcing his throat to clear. No, buddy, you're not alone. We've got you. Carefully, he slid his arms beneath Eli's frail body. The boy was frighteningly light, limp in a way that made Ryan's stomach nut. Heat was gone from him, stolen by the storm. And Ryan knew every second mattered. As he lifted Eli against his chest, Ryan's heart pounded so hard it hurt. Fear clutched at him. That same old fear from years ago, the feeling of holding someone too late, of realizing the world had already taken them. Leah's face flashed before his eyes, water dripping from her hair, her lips blue, her body lifeless. Not again. God, not again. He pressed Eli closer, burying the boy's head against his shoulder to shield him from the wind. Stay with me, kid. You hear me? You hang on, Zeus barked once, pacing beside him, then turned toward the trail they had carved through the storm. Ryan adjusted his grip, shifting Eli so the wooden truck remained touched in the boy's arms. That toy, it was more than wood and wheels. It was his anchor, his reminder of home. Ryan wouldn't take it from him. He clicked his radio with numb fingers. "This is Hale. I've got him." "Repeat, I've got the boy. He's alive but critical. We need med-evac now," the static hissed. Then a voice broke through. "Copy, Hale. Hold tight. We'll guide you back. Just keep him warm." Ryan let out a bitter laugh under his breath. The storm was swallowing every shred of warmth it touched, but he wasn't about to surrender. He unzipped his parka, pressed Eli against his own chest, and zipped it shut again so the boy was cocooned inside. Sharing what heat Ryan had left, the child whimpered once, a sound so faint it could have been the wind. Ryan bent his head, whispering directly into his ear, "You're safe now. Zeus and we've got you. Just a little longer." The storm didn't care. It clawed at them, screamed at them, tried to pry Eli back into its frozen grasp. But Ryan pushed forward, stumbling to his feet, every muscle straining. His boots broke through drifts. His lungs burned with each breath. Yet none of it mattered. All that mattered was the fragile weight pressed against his chest, the tiny heartbeat he prayed hadn't stopped. Behind him, Zeus stayed close, guarding their flank. The dog's presence was a steady drumbeat of reassurance, powerful, unyielding, reminding Ryan that they were not alone in this fight. Every step back toward safety felt like a mile. The snow blinded him, his strength wavered, but he clung to the boy with a desperation that bordered on fury. He would not lose him, not tonight. "Hold on, Eli," Ryan whispered over and over, as much for himself as for the boy. "Hold on, Guardian's here." And with that, Ryan Hale, his loyal dog, and the fragile hope of a child pressed into the storm, carrying a life that hung by the thinnest of threads. The storm still howled outside when Ryan burst through the flaps of the emergency field hospital. His arms clutched Eli against his chest, the boy's body limp beneath layers of Ryan's jacket. "Got a kid hypothermic, non-responsive." Ryan's voice rang sharp with urgency. Two medics rushed forward, a gurney squealing across the floor. The warmth inside was a shock after the blizzard. Kerosene heaters blasted the air with a dry, metallic heat, mingling with a sting of antiseptic. Ryan lowered Eli carefully, reluctant to let go, his heart still hammering. The wooden truck tumbled from the boy's arms as the medics leaned in. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and steady hands, caught sight of it. She tucked it gently back beneath Eli's fingers before going to work. "Core tanks dropping fast," another medic muttered. "We need warm fluids. Blankets, get that heat pack ready." Ryan stepped back, chest heaving. His parka was soaked, his gloves stiff with ice. Zeus pressed against his leg, whining softly, as if unwilling to break the bond with the boy they'd just pulled from the storm. Then Mark Turner stumbled into the tent. His face was gray with exhaustion, his miner's jacket still caked with soot and snow. He froze at the sight of his son lying motionless on the cot. Eli, the name tore from his throat like a wound opening. He rushed forward but stopped short when the medic raised a hand. "Stay back, we're working." Mark's fists clenched, knuckles white. For a moment he looked lost. A man who'd spent his life underground, fighting rock and fire, now helpless before the fragility of his own child. His lips trembled. He pressed a hand against his forehead, then let it slide down over his eyes as sobs broke free. Clara followed behind him, her coat drawn tight, face pale but composed. She did not cry. She stood with her arms crossed, her mouth a thin, disapproving line. If anything, her presence made the tent feel colder. Mark turned to her, voice shaking. "Clara, look at him." "Oh boy," she cut him off. "Your boy?" Her tone carried no softness, only a flat weight of blame. "I told you he was a burden. Now look what's happened." The words hung in the air, sharper than the wind outside. Ryan, standing off to the side, felt his stomach twist. He saw the flinch in Mark's shoulders, the way guilt bent the man smaller. But then Mark straightened, his tear-streaked face hardening with something fiercer than shame. "Don't you dare," he whispered. "Don't you dare talk about him like that." The medics didn't pause. They wrapped Eli in heated blankets, slipped a mask over his face, started a line of warm fluids. One leaned close, calling the boy's name over and over, trying to pull him back. Minutes stretched into eternities. Ryan's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He felt like he was back at another hospital, years ago, begging his sister to breathe. Then a sound, faint, broken, but real, a cough. Eli's chest convulsed. A weak breath shuddering past his lips. One of the medics bent low, eyes lighting with relief. "We've got him. He's fighting." Mark fell to his knees beside the cot, clutching the rail as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. His tears poured freely now, no longer hidden behind miner's grit. He reached out, hesitated, then gently brushed a damp curl from his son's forehead. "Eli, I'm here. Dad's here." For a heartbeat, the boy's eyes fluttered open. They were glassy, unfocused, but they found his father. A tiny sound escaped him, almost a word. Then his lashes fell again, surrendering to exhausted sleep. Mark bowed his head over his son's hand, shoulders shaking with gratitude and regret. Clara shifted uncomfortably, her gaze darting away. Her lips pursed as if she wanted to protest, to remind everyone how much trouble this child had caused. But the room was thick with a silence that condemned her, and for once, she said nothing. Ryan let out a long breath, his body sagging with release. Zeus leaned into his leg, tail giving one cautious wag. They had done it, against the storm. Against the odds, the boy was still alive. The relief was short-lived. Two figures in heavy coats stepped inside the tent, social workers, their ID badges catching the lamplight. They surveyed the scene with practiced eyes, taking in the boy's condition, the father's tears, and the mother's rigid indifference. One spoke quietly to the lead medic. "We'll need a full report." A child wandering alone in a storm raises questions, serious questions. Mark looked up, alarm flashing across his face. "Wait, do you think?" "I didn't. He's my son." "I'd never." The social worker raised a calming hand. "Sir, we're not making judgments yet, but the safety of the child comes first. We'll need to talk." Ryan watched the exchange, jaw tightening. He wasn't naive. He knew how these investigations worked. Still, his chest ached for the boy, who had endured so much already, and for Mark, who now faced the possibility of losing his son in another way. The storm outside began to ease, the roar softening to a muted howl. Inside, beneath the glow of lantern light, Eli Turner slept alive, fragile, and balanced on the edge of an uncertain future. Ryan laid a hand on Zeus's back, grounding himself. This fight wasn't over. The storm had passed, but another kind of battle was just beginning. The storm that had nearly swallowed Eli alive was finally over. But inside Silver Pine's small hospital, another reckoning was just beginning. The blizzard had left the town blanketed in silence, the streets buried in drifts. But the quiet within the walls of the medical ward carried a different weight, one heavy with questions no one wanted to answer. Eli lay resting in a narrow bed, his tiny chest rising with slow, steady breaths. Warmth had returned to his skin, and color touched his cheeks again. But his fragility was undeniable. At the bedside, Mark sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the boy as if afraid he would vanish should he dare to blink. Lara stood further back, arms crossed, her gaze fixed not on Eli but on the tiled floor. Her lips set in an expression of annoyance rather than concern. The two social workers from the night before returned early that morning. Their presence filled the room with a quiet authority, as if the storm outside had simply been a prologue to the storm inside. One of them, a woman named Karen Whitmore, carried a folder thick with notes. She greeted the nurses, then turned to Clara and Mark with an even tone. "We've spoken with the medics, the rescue team, and the neighbors," she said. "We need to ask you both some questions privately, if necessary." Mark nodded stiffly, rubbing a hand down his face. Clara's jaw tightened, but she gave no objection. Karen took a seat, flipping through her notes. "Mrs. Turner, we've heard accounts suggesting there were difficulties in the home, that Eli may not have been receiving the care and kindness a child his age requires. Can you speak to that?" Clara lifted her chin. "He's a difficult child. Always quiet, skulking around, drawing strange pictures. I did my best, but he's not mine. He was never mine." Her voice carried no apology, only a brittle sharpness that made Ryan, who had remained near the door with Zeus, clench his fists. Karen's expression didn't change, but her pen scratched steadily across the page. "So you acknowledge you treated him differently from your own responsibility as his stepmother?" Clara shrugged, as though the answer was self-evident. "It wasn't abuse. I raised him the way my parents raised me. Children toughen up with a break." The words settled in the air like shards of ice. Mark's head jerked up, his eyes wide with pain. "Clara," he said hoarsely, "you knew he was just a boy. My boy. And you." His voice cracked, anger and guilt colliding. Karen turned her gaze on him gently. "Mr. Turner, did you ever witness behavior you believed harmful to Eli?" Mark's mouth opened, then shut again. His shoulders sagged under a weight he had carried in silence for far too long. He looked at his son, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm raging on his behalf. "Yes," he whispered. The admission seemed to drain the last of his strength. "I saw the way she spoke to him, the way she looked at him like he was less. I heard the shouting. I knew. And I did nothing." The room stilled. Clara spun toward him, fury flashing. "Don't you dare put this on me. You were never home, always working, always gone. You left me with him. and now you want to wash your hands of it." Mock didn't flinch. He didn't defend himself. He simply bowed his head, the truth bleeding from him in ragged confession. "She's right, I wasn't there. I told myself I was providing, that the extra shifts at the mine were for Eli's future. But really, I was hiding. I didn't know how to be what he needed. And while I was gone, he suffered." Karen's voice cut through the silence. Firm but not unkind. "Mr. Turner, acknowledging failure is the first step. But what matters now is whether you are prepared to protect your son going forward." Mark lifted his eyes. They were red-rimmed but resolute. "I'll do whatever it takes. He deserves better than what I gave him." Clara laughed bitterly, a hollow sound. "You can play the hero all you want, but you'll never manage without me." Karen closed the folder and stood. "Mrs. Turner, based on your statements and corroborating accounts, we will be pursuing protective custody arrangements, effective immediately. You are to have no unsupervised contact with Eli." Clara's face blanched. "You can't." "Yes, we can't," Karen replied calmly. "And we will. The court will be informed, and a temporary protective order will be issued. If you wish to contest it, you may do so legally. But until then, your presence in this child's life ends here." Clara's composure cracked. Her mouth twisted, fury giving way to disbelief. But she found no words that could sway the iron in Karen's tone. She grabbed her coat, muttering curses under her breath, and stormed out of the hospital. The door slammed behind her, rattling the thin walls. Silence returned, broken only by the soft beep of Eli's monitor. Mark stared at the empty doorway, then at his son. His shoulders shook, tears spilling freely. "I should have fought for you sooner," he whispered. "I should have protected you. I'm so sorry, Eli." Ryan shifted, his throat tight. He knew that kind of guilt, the kind that carved deep and never truly healed. But he also knew that Eli, though fragile, had survived, and survival meant there was still hope. Zeus let out a soft whine, tail brushing against Ryan's leg. Karen placed a gentle hand on Mark's shoulder. "The law will handle Clara. What Eli needs now is love and consistency. He needs someone to show him he's safe." Mark nodded, wiping his eyes. "I'll give him that. I swear it." For the first time since the storm, the air inside the hospital felt lighter. The truth had been dragged into the open, and though it hurt, it was the beginning of something new. Clara was gone. The weight of her bitterness no longer hung over the boy's fragile world. As Eli stirred in his sleep, his tiny hand still clutching the broken wooden truck, Ryan allowed himself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, the child's story was about to change course. The snow along Silver Pine's streets had begun to melt, dripping from eaves like tiny clocks ticking toward spring. For Eli, though, the days after the hospital blurred together in a haze of bandaged warmth and cautious voices. Nurses came and went, their hands gentle, their smiles soft but fleeting. His father visited often, sitting at his bedside with eyes that seemed older than before, full of regret and vows Eli was too young to understand. But when the decision was made that he would not return to the cabin where Clara's shadow lingered, Eli's life shifted. A new name entered his world, Lily Harper. Lily was a young schoolteacher who had taught in Silverpine before grief drove her to the edges of quiet. She had once held a baby of her own, a little girl who never grew beyond her first year. Since then, her heart had carried both loss and a tenderness that longed for a place to rest. When the social workers asked if she could provide temporary care for Eli, she agreed without hesitation. The first time Eli stepped into Lily's cottage, his eyes widened. It was small, perched near the edge of Crater Lake, but warmth wrapped around him immediately. The glow of lamplight softened the wooden walls. Curtains fluttered gently from the warmth of a stove, and the air smelled faintly of bread and rosemary. For a boy who had only known rooms filled with silence and shadows, it was like walking into another world. "Welcome home, Eli," Lily said softly, kneeling so her eyes met his. He clutched his wooden trot tighter, unsure whether to believe her. His gaze darted around the room, the braided rug, the shelves lined with worn books, the framed photographs of a smiling baby with soft curls. Everything radiated something unfamiliar. Care. That night, Lily served him soup thick with vegetables and bread still warm from the oven. Eli stared at the bowl, steam rising in curls, and then looked up at her as if waiting for the reprimand, the sharp words that usually followed mealtime, but none came. Lily only smiled. "Eat as much as you like," she said, "and if you don't like it, we'll try something else tomorrow." Eli lifted a spoon cautiously. The flavors surprised him, rich, comforting. He ate slowly, then faster, until his bowl was nearly empty. Lily's eyes shone with quiet joy as she refilled it, for the first time in his life. Supper didn't feel like a trial. It felt like belonging. Later, After the dishes were cleared, Eli wandered to the window. The glass had fogged from the heat of the stove. Almost without thinking, he raised a finger and traced a shape: long ears, sharp eyes, a tail curling upward. The wolf guardian returned, but this time something was different. He paused, staring at the drawing, then added details he had never drawn before. A harness strap, the slope of a muzzle like Zeus's, the strong stance of a dog ready to protect. Guardian was changing, no longer just a creature of his imagination but a reflection of the real protectors who had pulled him from the storm. Behind him, Lily noticed. She approached quietly, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. "That's beautiful," she whispered. "Who is he?" Eli hesitated, his small voice finally answering. Guardian, she repeated with a smile. "I think we all need one of those." Her eyes drifted to the hearth, where Ryan had dropped by earlier that evening with Zeus, the big German shepherd sprawling comfortably near the fire. She knew Eli was right. Sometimes protectors came in the form of brave men and loyal dogs. When bedtime arrived, Eli's chest tightened. His old room had been a place of whispers and shadows, but Lily's guest room glowed with soft lamplight. A quilt patched in warm colors lay across the bed, and on the nightstand sat a small carved lamp that cast gentle stars across the ceiling. Eli crawled beneath the quilt, clutching his wooden truck. The broken wheel clicked faintly as he turned it, the sound echoing like a train in his memory. He glanced at the framed photo on the dresser, a picture of Lily with her baby. For once, the image of a child in a home didn't sting. It soothed. Lily tucked the blanket around him, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. Her voice was steady, tender but sure. "Eli," she said, "the past has been taken care of, and the rest." She paused, her smile trembling with emotion. "The rest, let love take care of." The words landed in him like warmth, deeper than the blankets. Deeper than the blanket's heat. Something in his chest loosened, something that had been locked tight for as long as he could remember. His lips curved into a small, hesitant smile, clutching his truck. Eli whispered a word only he could hear, a promise to himself, to Guardian, to Zeus and Ryan, to Lily and the light in this house. Safe, for the first time. The word didn't feel like a dream, it felt real. Outside, the snow still lay heavy over, but in Lily Harper's cottage, a new season had begun, and in the quiet of his new room, Eli Turner drifted into sleep with the smallest of smiles, his world no longer frozen, but thawing one breath, one heartbeat, one act of love at a time.